Welcome, everyone. Today is Friday, May 5th, 2023. This is the last DEI Friday of the 2022-23 academic year. My name is Anna D'Souza. I'm a professor at the Marxe School of Public and International Affairs here at Baruch College, and I'm so happy to welcome each and every one of you who is here with us today, as well as those of you who are joining on, watching us by video later. So today we are here for a DEI Friday focused on what it means to be Asian and how to think about kind of the experiences and learn about the experiences of the AAPI community in the US, and in particular, thinking about what's been happening over the past few years of the pandemic with the anti-Asian violence and hate that has spiked and has been continuing. We have two guests who are going to be joining us. Kahlen Kim from our counseling center. She was the one who came up with this idea, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And then we have a special guest who's joining us, Haley Kim, who is an educator, an activist, and she's running for city council. So we'll talk to you about her in a few minutes as well. We are so happy to have you all join us. As usually, we start our sessions with a little bit of grounding and then our community agreements. And usually I would tell you about the following DEI Fridays, but there aren't any. So you will just have to stay tuned till next year to hear what's on the program for these sort of events at the college. If you're interested in continuing them or leading them, or helping out with them, let me know privately in the chat. Okay, we're always looking for people to be part of this program. So let's slow down and count then how many words per minute I speak after this and before this grounding. This could be a little fun activity for all of you. It's like a drinking game, but not really, with Anna's level of excitement. Okay, so this will be quick because we've got two guests and a lot to do in an hour. So I'm just going to invite you to take 1 minute right now, 1 minute, to take some deep breaths and to focus on three things. Area 1, slowing down your breathing. Long, deep inhales through your mouth and long, slow exhales through your, long, deep inhales through your nose. And then exhales can be through your nose or your mouth. This tells our bodies that we're safe and we're sound. Second, I want you to focus on your physical comfort at the moment. Areas you want to lean into, maybe give yourself some extra attention. See if you need to make any adjustments where you're sitting or standing or lying. And the last thing I invite you to focus on is how it feels to show up in this community. Many of you have come before. And just feel into those feelings that you feel into those feelings that you feel. Wow, one of those days. Feel what comes up for you when you're in this space, when you see these friendly faces, familiar faces, friendly names and faces, and how that makes you feel and what your sense of belonging is. And I hope that you know that you belong here and you are appreciated in this space. All right, folks. So slowly, if your eyes were closed, I invite you to open your eyes back up. And if you want to keep your cameras on or off, just get comfortable. The space is for you, for all of us. And we're going to begin. Again, I'm so very happy to have you all here. We typically read the community agreements. I'm going to do that super fast today. Here are our community agreements. Okay. And all of our resources and the past events are all here on our website. So you have access to all that we've done. We're putting a YouTube channel together as well. But for today, I'm just going to read the community agreements. So we are a community in progress. We can struggle together and we can grow together. We will practice active listening, respectful language, and kindness. We can ask for literacy moments when there are terms we are not familiar with. We assume positive intent, and we also take responsibility for impact. We value each other's lived experiences and appreciate the vulnerability necessary to share them. We are willing to slow down discussions to facilitate the exploration of complex, nuanced issues. We are prepared for discomfort around these topics, and if context seems inappropriate or harmful, we will pause the discussion and may ask folks to discuss privately with facilitators. If you need support during this presentation, please direct message me. Yeah, okay. So we are ready to begin. I would like first to invite Kahlen Kim to be part of this presentation, right? So there will be two components here. First will be a Kahlen Kim giving us a brief presentation. Then I'm going to interview Haley, and you're going to get to know her and what she's all about and why she's running for city council. And, you know, she wasn't brought here in that vein, but that really motivates what she's doing. And it's really exciting for us. And then we're going to have a Q&A period with them. And then we're going to share some resources. So today, given the nature of the talk, we're not going to have the breakout sessions that we usually do. So I just want to give you a heads up because I know you all love your breakout sessions. So Dr. Kahlen Kim is a New York State licensed psychologist. She received her doctorate in clinical psychology from Adelphi University and has a bachelor's degree in psychology from Cornell. She's passionate about providing mental health services and facilitating service utilization in a college population and in marginalized populations. As a clinician, Dr. Kim primarily works from a trauma-informed, psychodynamically oriented, integrative approach with a meaningful consideration of the biopsychosocial perspective. She is bilingual, speaking both English and Korean. And Kahlen, I welcome you here today. I want to tell you all that Kahlen was instrumental, as was Teresa Hurst. I see you, Teresa. Hi. Teresa put Kahlen and me in touch a few months ago, and we connected on talking about this session. And we also worked with Na Yin, who is in the Marxe school, and she was also instrumental in kind of brainstorming and thinking about what we wanted this session to look like. So Kahlen, I invite you to present. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Anna, Teresa, Lynn, and all the other counseling center staff for making this happen. I am very excited and also slightly nervous to do this, and no pressure at all, being the last one to present. But anyway, we will go right into it, and let me start sharing my screen. All right. And presenters view. Everyone is seeing.
Looks good.
Things okay? All right. Okay, so today we'll be discussing what it means to be Asian in this country, with the focus on understanding two important concepts, model minority and yellow peril, and their significant impact on the lives of Asian and AAPI individuals in the US. And in order to understand these concepts, we'll be taking a brief history lesson on how they came to be. As a psychologist, I'm constantly seeking to understand why people behave and think the way they do. And it's crucial for me to understand the context in which their behaviors and cognitions were shaped and influenced. And that's why we'll be taking a brief, concise history walkthrough so that we can acknowledge the Asian and AAPI experience more fully and deeply. In addition, we'll be discussing ways to effect change as individuals, educators, researchers, and leaders within our institution to address these issues. That will happen at the towards the very end of our meeting. All right, so what does it mean to be Asian in this country right now? Well, being Asian in the US means that, unfortunately, you've been experiencing xenophobia, racism, and hate crimes since the beginning of the COVID pandemic. It means that you've been worrying constantly about being threatened or attacked by others. And why is this happening, or why has this been happening, you might ask? Let's name it. It's because of the use of the age-old yellow peril xenophobic scapegoatism in a new and more horrific ways by the previous administration and its autocrat. When a country faces an existential threat, the resulting fear looks for a target on which it can displace its turmoil, and that target is often a minoritized group or outsider. This is what happened in 2001 to Muslim, South Asian, Hindu, Middle Eastern, and Arab communities, and it's what happened here in the US in response to COVID. And what is yellow peril, one might ask? And once again, to understand what it is, it's important to understand how it was formed. So the 19th century saw an increase in demand for cheap labor due to factors like the abolition of slave trade, the passage of 13th Amendment, California gold rush, and infrastructure development. And to fulfill this demand, people saw cheap contract labor from Asia, leading to significant immigration to the US. But the influx of Asian immigrants with different looks, skin color, and ways of living was unwelcomed by many Americans who felt threatened in terms of opportunities and positions. This hostility led to discrimination, ostracization, racist attacks, and discriminatory legislation against Asian immigrants. Additionally, in the 20th century, the rise of East Asian countries, particularly Japan, created a fear that they would surpass the US and other European nations as global superpowers. And this fear intensified during World War II, when Japan began its imperial expansion and allied with Germany. So this is the background where the racist color metaphor called yellow peril began to materialize, describing Asians, particularly East Asians, as uncivilized, unclean, diseased, ambitious, and subhuman in immorality and ruthlessness, and as beings that needed to be rejected and excluded from the Western world. Despite the spike in racial violence against AAPI communities across the country, honestly, not much has been done to address or rectify this threat to this particular population and threat to humanity. And researchers and activists cite the model minority stereotype as a reason for the underwhelming movement outside of the AAPI community to support and protect one of the most affected populations. And to understand the model minority stereotype, we need to consider the contextual factors that led to its creation. So in the mid-20th century, with the end of World War II, the beginning of the Cold War, and the Civil Rights Movement, the old system needed something to keep communists and Black Americans in check, and the model minority concept was popularized. So people in positions of power began portraying Asian Americans as quote unquote ideal immigrants of color to the US because of their economic success. They were characterized as the good ones who are diligent, undemanding, and docile, unlike Black Americans. The purpose behind this portrayal was to promote capitalism, demonstrate the superiority of the US over other nations like the Soviet Union, weaken the legitimacy of the Black civil rights movement, and ultimately safeguard white supremacy over other races. And when examining the model minority concept, we can see that Asian Americans are placed within a framework of race relations that revolves around the relationship to white Americans and Black Americans. In racial triangulation occurs, racial triangulation occurs when one minoritized group is prioritized over another, or when they are set against each other in a way that ultimately reinforces and protects white power, privilege, and dominance. And so in the case of Asian Americans, this means that they are positioned as superior to Black Americans, but are still viewed as perpetually foreign and unable to assimilate with white Americans. And it's important to note that the model minority concept created the widespread belief in the model minority myth. This myth portrays Asians as a single, homogeneous, monolithic group who are all upwardly mobile, compliant, and doing well. It suggests that their issues are not the same as those faced by other groups who are truly suffering, and that Asian Americans don't require additional help or attention. And besides the model minority myth, there are other damaging stereotypes about Asian Americans, API that are heavily influenced by and intertwined with this myth. And these stereotypes perpetuate harmful assumptions about AAPI communities, their experiences, and diversity. But I'm here to bust some stereotypes and misconceptions about Asian and AAPI individuals. All right, so first of all, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, AAPIs, are not a homogeneous monolithic group. They're vast cultural, religious, ethnic, and linguistic variations within the AAPI community. In fact, there are over 30 different ethnic groups within AAPI. And it's also important to note that even the use of the term AAPI may not be a good practice because it combines two distinct and diverse groups into one monolithic racial ethnic bloc under the premise that these populations share cultural and historical connections and have similar needs. And this can obscure the unique experiences and challenges faced by each group. And are AAPI individuals really so well off and well assimilated that they are doing just fine? Well, as these data show, AAPIs clearly face hardships and struggles, just like any other minoritized group. It may even face more challenging difficulties in some areas. For example, income inequality is greatest among Asians in the United States. And Asian Americans are the poorest group in New York City, with about 1 in 4 living in poverty. And although on average, Asian Americans are better educated than the general US population, but there are significant disparities within the group, as these data suggest. So taken together, it's clear that the model minority concept is inaccurate and wrong. Furthermore, the myth negatively impacts the Asian and AAPI community on different levels. Individually, it can create a sense of inadequacy and pressure to meet impossibly high standards. On a mesosystem level, it can lead teachers to overlook the struggles of Asian and AAPI students. Clinicians like myself may also believe that mental disorders do not affect the Asian community as frequently or severely as they do other racial and minoritized groups. On a macro system level, it can act as a barrier to developing and maintaining social programs and policies for Asian communities. The bamboo ceiling is another outcome of the model minority myth. And I wanted to take some time to debunk other stereotypes that come from the model minority myth. For example, some people say that Asians and AAPI are not good at sports. Is that true? I don't think so. If you take a look at these photos, you will see that it's clearly just a misconception, stereotype, and it's wrong. And are Asians and AAPIs only good at STEM fields? Again, heck no. There are so many amazing Asian and AAPI artists, entertainers, and trailblazers outside of STEM fields, but you may not be aware of their existence unless you make an effort to look beyond the narrow stereotypes. This is why representation matters so much. All right, going back to the two driving forces of racism against AAPI, yellow peril, and model minority myth. Although seemingly in sort of an opposite direction, these two stereotypes work together. The yellow peril stereotype represents a masculine threat, while the model minority stereotype portrays Asian Americans as docile and diligent with the feminine tone. They work together in tandem in that once someone is perceived to be too ambitious, too masculine, and deviate from the model minority stereotype, they then get labeled as yellow peril. This perpetuates the notion that Asians are inferior and perpetual outsiders, and in turn maintains and fuels the exclusion and attacks on Asians. And these two concepts really work well in a dangerously complementary way, in that the yellow peril gives people permission and a pretext to attack Asians and Asian Americans. And the model minority works as like a muffler, silencing and deafening these individuals' cries of pain. And of course, not all people engage in violence, but to those who do, attacking Asian and AAPI individuals feels okay, less morally compromising, feels righteous, and to some extent, maybe even patriotic, because to them, Asian and AAPI individuals are not Americans. And after reviewing the material, it's clear that Asians and Asian Americans are experiencing racial trauma due to the ongoing impact of racism. This form of trauma, also known as race-based stress, is caused by experiences of racial bias, discrimination, and hate crimes, which can include threats of harm, humiliation, microaggression, and witnessing harm inflicted on other people of color due to racism. Studies have shown that the negative effects of racial trauma parallel those of other trauma-based disorders. And research has demonstrated that centuries of racism have had a profound and negative impact on communities of color, leading to higher rates of illness and death across a wide range of health conditions when compared to their white counterparts. So this is what it means to be Asian and Asian American right now in this country and for a very long time. And why have we taken the time to go over a really distressing truth faced by these communities? Well, it's because we need to bring attention to these issues, acknowledge them, and gain greater understanding. Because only then can we hope to rectify these injustices. And so I hope this has shed light on the experience of Asian and AAPI individuals in this country right now, and encourages you to reflect on your own worldview. And so now let's shift gears. I think I successfully stopped sharing my screen, right? Yes.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much, Kahlen, for that. I think that, as you said, without knowing our history and the context of what's happening in this country, it is very hard for us to understand, the why and the how and the and to kind of think about in our own lives, reflect upon what we can do to combat some of this. And I know that in the last part of our session, you're going to talk about that. So thank you so much. And I always learn something when I read more about our history, and just to say that my own identity, as an Indian American woman, is very wrapped up in these things. And when we think about Asian Americans, the yellow peril, Indians have their own thing. As you said, you're being lumped in together, but I certainly did not feel any impact from things that the anti-Asian hate and violence that came through the pandemic, right? Because of how I look. But you better believe that when it's anything to do with kind of Muslims or anyone who's kind of brownish in some way, then that's when Indians are more, that aspect of being Asian, it comes up. And so it's really, I think, as you said in the beginning, when you were showing us the different pictures, for reasons of categories / perhaps, domination and many other things, we've been lumped into this big group. And so I appreciate you bring that nuance. So now I would like to welcome Haley Kim here in this space with all of us. And remember, we're going to have a Q&A at the end. So you can follow Haley on Instagram and all those other things, right? And read about her on the website. I'll put in the chat. But right now, I'd like to introduce you to her. She's an educator, an organizer, and a socialist. She immigrated to Sunnyside from Seoul at 5 years old. She was raised in a working class family by a nail technician and a home care worker who struggled to make ends meet. She's a proud graduate of New York City Public Schools, PS 150, and the Baccalaureate School for Global Education. She went on to become an educator at Hunter, where she assisted students struggling to navigate difficult learning conditions during the pandemic. As the housing organizer at the Min Kwan Center, she has been on the front lines of protests for good cause eviction, ending 421-A, and freezing rent hikes. She also launched the Hate Free Zone initiative to address the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes, leading Know Your Rights trainings, along with cross-cultural events and rallies to empower the community. So first, let's all give her a warm round of applause, give her some love in the chat, and in our Zoom emojis. Haley, welcome. We are so happy to have you here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Hi, thank you for being here. And I want to thank Kahlen for connecting you to our group to be part of this discussion today. So we'll start off with just asking you to share a little bit about how you identify and if there's anything that, was in that bio that was missing that you'd want to kind of elaborate on. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean that's a very loaded question in itself, right? How we each identify. Um, I think first I identify as a Korean American, more specifically 1.5 generation Korean American, which is like that weird mix between, yeah, you did immigrate with your parents, but you immigrated at such a young age that you have mostly gone to school in this country, and English may primarily be your language. And so I also identify as a working class New Yorker, and I definitely have all those three aspects of my identity.
Thank you. So, in your experience, we're interested. So you teach at Hunter sometimes, and you studied English,
Mhm.
and we'd like to know a little bit about how this model minority myth and other stereotypes affected you in higher education, in your educational process, and then what what the impact has been.
Yeah, so one of the first things is that I didn't really realize how much it affected me until I got into politics. I'd realized that a lot of the students that were in my classes who I was like studying with, who I was friends with, tended to not be AAPI. Um, there were a few in classes that dealt with things like colonial literature and things like that, but for the most part, it was a lot of people who I couldn't identify with racially, but of course I identified with them in a lot of other ways. They might have come from similar socioeconomic backgrounds, they might have come from New York City as well. And I studied up at Purchase College, so that was it was a lot of students from Westchester, and a lot of students from Long Island, and then I get into politics, and it kind of dawned on me like, oh wow, I for my MA program, I actually did a little bit of Russian literature as well, and it was kind of like, oh, I have not seen any Asian American students in these spaces at all. Um, when I was visiting, especially for things like PhD program visits, it was sort of very clear to me that these students came also from a different socioeconomic background than I did. And it felt very difficult to fit in. And it felt like the only way that I was going to be able to pursue a degree outside of an MA was going to be to study Asian American literature, because that was sort of what was expected of me. And that was sort of what went down.
Yeah, that's interesting. So can you so now to kind of move to some of the stuff that Kaylin talked about in terms of, this spike in hate and violence starting from the pandemic and well, not starting, but the spike during the pandemic. So I'd like to know a little bit about kind of your experiences during that period of time. I know I've read a little bit about you, you've done a lot of kind of advocacy and organizing, and so can you tell us a little bit more about how these past few years have been for you?
Yeah, so after I ran for city council, I decided that I wanted to do some nonprofit work. And one of the first places I looked was the Minkwon Center for Community Action. And in Korean, Minkwon means human rights. And I got hired as their housing organizer, but then immediately, because this is a nonprofit, my boss was like, oh, could you take on this other thing as well? We want to do something called the hate free zone, which is going to be addressing some of the stuff going around in terms of the AAPI hate that was going on. But our youth organizer, who we originally wanted to take care of this, doesn't want to take care of it. So would you do it? And I agreed, and we put together a bunch of events in the Flushing area, and we did things like panel discussions after a couple of films. One was Who Killed Vincent Chin. The other was the LA riots. It was something to do with the LA uprising. And on top of that, we were doing a lot of postering with information on what to do if you see something going on, like how do you respond? So it could be as simple as taking out your phone and filming for video evidence. It could be it really depended on your comfort level, and it was about getting the information out there. It was about who you can call if you see anything that doesn't kind of feed into this pro-policing narrative that we've had in our city, where if there's a spike in violence toward any group, the kind of reactionary response is to call the police. But then if you're in the middle of danger, if you're actively getting beaten up, the police aren't going to get there for another 45 minutes. So how do we make sure that the people who will be there are empowered to act? Was one of the things that we wanted to take care of. On top of that, it was multiracial organizing. Flushing is primarily Asian American, but there is a history of Black Americans living in Flushing, as well as famously the Jewish community. So we did a lot of organizing that didn't just center around AAPI. It was kind of like, how do we get together as a community and figure out these solutions? How do we learn about each other's cultures and kind of start to interact with each other and work with each other within Flushing? The other thing I did was direct to work with hate crime victims. There were two in particular who we did a little bit of fundraising for. We got their name out in the media to kind of amplify their story, and we used that as an opportunity to make sure that they had funds for medical care. There was one pretty famous case at Louis' Pizzeria in Elmhurst where a Korean home care worker was stabbed a few times. And the interesting thing was she didn't call police immediately. The reason why she was saved was because she ran into a pizzeria and the owners protected her. And it really, to me, amplified the fact that it wasn't going to be police who were going to take care of us. And the other thing that struck me about her case specifically, and the other, was the economic issues that went on there and the lack of mental health care that there was. The first case that I worked on was a young man named Chang Lim, and he was a fellow Korean American. He was in his 30s, and he was stabbed in front of a motel. And the reason he ended up there was because he had a lot of mental health issues that led to his family not being able to take care of him the way that they wanted to. So they were in the same neighborhood, but he was in a motel and he got hurt. And it was obviously a matter of making sure that everyone has housing as a matter of safety, and that was how we connected housing and anti-Asian hate crimes. And the other case was the home care worker who was not able to retire just because of the exploitative nature of home care work in New York City. So we made sure that we raised some money so she could kind of have a little bit of time off to recuperate at the very least. And yeah, it was the first time I also got to spend so much time around fellow Korean Americans in the workspace, and it was very interesting.
That's great. Well, there was a lot there. I have many questions, but I'll wait for the Q&A. So we've got one more question for you, and then we're going to move to Q&A with our participants. So, but thank you for sharing. There was a lot there, and I see linkages to, again, Kahlen's presentation when we think about how, within this the triangle that you had there, right, with white supremacy or whiteness on top, and then how different racial groups have been pitted against each other, even different within the Asian community, it's there as well. And so I think, so I really appreciate you just describing how, you and the center, and of course you were focused on serving the population there, but then recognizing like the history and the other, populations that are there, and the need to come together in some ways and to have alliances and allies during this, what was I can only imagine, extremely challenging and painful time. So my last question, because you're mentioning kind of your work there. And so my last question has to do with the experiences and challenges in leadership, particularly, you know, as an Asian American, as a Korean American, as you said, you identify, you know, now you're going into politics, even the other areas, even being, you know, an adjunct faculty member at Hunter, you know, just navigating these different, often white institutional spaces. There, you know, this is the last DEI Friday, but I had mentioned to you, I think that the first DEI Friday this semester was with Dr. Margaret Chin, who is at Hunter as well. And she talked about how Asians don't always get to the Asian Americans don't get to the top of the corporate ladder here in the US. And, you know, there's a lot of evidence of these things in many industries. And I'm just kind of wondering more about your personal experience in these areas and what the challenges maybe have been as you veer into politics in this. Thanks.
Yeah, so I mean, it is really difficult as an Asian American woman to kind of be taken seriously in a lot of ways. I've noticed that when people describe me, they tend to see me as a lot shyer than I actually am. They tend to see me as less of a fighter, less outgoing, which are really important qualities to have in these spaces. And on the other hand, the adjectives that people use to describe me are kind of quiet, really nice, like very intellectual. These are kind of like not necessarily negative words in a lot of contexts, but it does mean that because I also look a little bit younger than my age, I'm 30, but people tend to assume I'm a bit younger, and it means that people kind of infantilize me in a little bit, in a little way. They kind of are like, oh, cute kid or whatever, and they always sort of like point things out in terms of like, oh, you're so young, which it's just like, yeah, but not as young as you think. And I also noticed that in some ways as an adjunct, it's always a pro and a con, right? To be younger. It helps me connect with students a little bit better because they feel a little bit more comfortable with me. They see me as someone a little bit more in their peer group. And in a way that's a good thing. But also they see me as a little bit less of an authority figure, which I've never had to do much classroom management. But after COVID, it became much more of a thing that had to happen. And it did pose some difficulties there. And even at Minkwon Center, it's a great organization. I don't really have anything bad to say about it, but I did notice, and a lot of people notice, that the way that the hierarchy was structured was that it was mainly men at the top, but then the worker bees, the organizers, the people there 4 days a week, making phone calls, doing canvassing, putting together events, mobilizing, all that, we're all women, which they kind of use as like yeah, no, this is really, really a good thing. But then also it's sort of like, oh, but there's only one director who's a woman in this organization. And there was also a press conference I was invited to where I kind of realized that the only reason I might have been invited there was because I was the only young woman who they could have invited, who kind of fit the narrative of what they were trying to do. And it felt like I was like placed there for a photo op, a little bit tokenized. It was interesting, but overall, I did find that because of the district I'm running in, which is an incredibly progressive district where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez actually got her start, people were much more used to seeing a young woman running for office. And so I think our district can be one of the places where we start to shatter some of these stereotypes and actually bring forward more young women in positions of power. And I mean, I'm running against an incumbent who's also a Korean American woman, but I think it just goes to show that Korean American women can run for office, we can win, and we can be taken seriously.
Thank you, Haley. I appreciate that. Just describing the challenges, but also kind of your attitude to those challenges and just your, knowing who you are, right? And how you see yourself versus others. I really appreciate you sharing that insight with us. So now we're going to move to the Q&A portion. Thank you, Angie, for putting some words in the chat more about Dr. Margaret Chin's work and what she finds. I will invite our participants to unmute or drop in the chat any questions you have for either of our speakers, Haley or Kahlen. If you want to put your Zoom hand up or just kind of give a nod and just unmute. Thank you. There's one for you in the chat, Kahlen. Go ahead, Angie, you can unmute.
I can expand, but just, yeah, if you've, so this semester when I was talking to my students about the connection between the model minority myth and the history of what happens when we do things in the name of national security and sort of a connection to people of Middle Eastern descent and making that connection. So looking at these themes of solidarity, I was wondering if you, with your history in the model that you're looking at, where we're considering divides, particularly among African Americans and Asian Americans, with the model minority myth that Peterson develops in, I think it was 1966, and that piece, Japanese Success American Style. Do you see a connection, or if you, in your work, looked at some of the history with the timing of the Daniel Patrick Moynihan report, which was, I think, a year before it? So that's sort of a follow-up to the Moynihan report that is linking problems, racial disparities among African Americans to poor culture, a matriarchy thesis that it's led by women, that the fathers are missing, and that report is coming out, I think, 1965. I think that the model minority was following it, if I recall some of that. So I was just wondering if you've written about that connection, because it's something that I was trying to think through with my students as well this semester.
That's a really, really good question, but unfortunately, I am not familiar or well-versed in Daniel Patrick Moynihan's report. But if yes to William Peterson, the article coming out in 1966, and if the Moynihan's report has to do with this describing Black Americans in a very negative tone, then I imagine the connection between his and Williams has to do with the racial triangulation theory, where the people already in power are doing something in order to keep the system in place, not make any disturbance, not make like a good room for other groups of people.
Thank you. Would someone else like to ask a question? Oh, quiet for the last DEI Friday, folks. It's okay. I got lots of questions. Don't worry. I'm happy just for you to all be here. Oh, yes, go for it. Yes, please.
Yeah, so I'm teacher Ho from the English department. And so as an Asian woman, and then I always kind of talk about politics in my class. And then most of my students are Chinese from the Chinatown in Brooklyn or in Flushing. And then and I always kind of refer them back to the ideas that like women, especially Asian women, is not really participating in politics that much comparing to other like minority groups or something. And then I always tell them that, you know, if you get to sit at the table, you get to say something. So I guess like I'm just wondering, like, you know, do you have any advice in terms of because for my student, typically they feel that, you know, this survival or like, you know, being like established professionally or having the money to kind of support their family, that was priority. But politics is not something that related to them or doesn't have an effect on them at all or something. So I guess like my question would be, do you have any advice in terms of like getting students to be involved in like advocacy or politics in a way that, you know, kind of having them feel that, this issue, that's something that would, again, like will actually have direct effect on their communities.
Yeah, so I would directly talk about the issues with them. A lot of AAPI struggle with being able to afford basic things like housing. Those 1 in 4 Asian Americans who live in poverty are having trouble affording rent, right? And even 2 days ago, the mayor and his rent guidelines board had a meeting to discuss whether rent stabilized units the rent on them should be raised 17% over the next 2 years. These are things that directly affect students like the students who go to Hunter College or any other CUNY. And these are things that our students' voices should be heard on, right? Why is it that we should be divided essentially through economic hardships and kept away from the political process because we separate providing for our family from politics, right? Income inequality is a political issue. This is something that affects all of our students. A lot of CUNY students tend to be 1st or 2nd generation immigrants, lower income households. These are really big issues. And it's about making sure that students have the connections made for them. Another thing is education in itself, right? CUNY tuition keeps going up. This is something that directly affects our students. It's something they can see every year. They either have to pay for their tuition themselves and they have to work to be able to pay for it, or their parents have to work at like extra shifts at really difficult manual labor jobs to be able to pay for this stuff. And pointing these things out, things that directly affect them, and kind of connecting them to different events, maybe. Like there was a protest to say that rent should not be raised on regulated buildings by 17% right before the meeting. So informing them of things like that, things that would actually genuinely animate them, maybe getting them to put together a letter to the governor whenever she decides that it's cool to raise CUNY tuition, SUNY tuition, her first term in office officially. So I would just let them know that being able to provide for your family and politics are not two separate issues. It's not one or the other. One directly affects the other. If politicians who do not care about people, who put profit over people, are constantly kept in charge, it becomes steadily more difficult for us to be able to provide for our families. And that is the core of why I want to run on the platform that I want to, which is more money for schools, libraries, parks, making sure that people essentially have a roof over their heads, food on the table. These are really, really daily issues that we do have control over through politics.
Thank you so much for that, Haley, and thank you for that question. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kahlen. She's going to share some wonderful resources. Zin, that was directly to me, FYI. You can put it in the chat to everyone. I think it was a question. And I'm really grateful now. I see that there are a few more questions that have come in, but I will take a look at them while Kahlen shares just some kind of last minute recommendations and tips. This kind of touches on what Haley was talking about in terms of the work that she did during the during the pandemic years in thinking about what you can do in your own space. Typically, as you all know who've been here before, we have breakout sessions for this, but Kahlen has put together a great list, I think. And so we're gonna go with that right now. Thank you.
All right, okay, now I'm gonna try sharing my screen again. All right, looking okay? Yes? All right, so now that we've covered information heavy and had a good conversation, let's take a look at our institution. Here's the breakdown of Baruch student population by ethnicity as of fall 2021. As you can see, we have a significant number of Asian and AAPI students. Given this, it's crucial that we create a safe space for these students and address any harmful stereotypes or discriminatory practices that may affect our Asian and AAPI community. So we're going to go over 4 levels of things that we can do as a person, as a teacher or educator, as a researcher, and as a leader in this institution. So as a person, what we can do is reflect on our worldviews, educate ourselves and others about Asian and Asian American history and culture, speak up and take action when you witness discrimination or harassment, and advocate for policies and laws that address discrimination and hate crimes. And changes that we can make as a teacher or educator are creating a safe and inclusive classroom environment. Again, speak out against discrimination and anti-Asian violence when you see it happening. Incorporate Asian and Asian American perspectives into your teaching. Provide and also providing resources to your students. Make sure your students are aware of resources available to them, like counseling services and advocacy group on campus. And changes that we can make as a researcher include being aware of researcher bias, our own biases, and improving data disaggregation and the effective use of disaggregated data. Conducting intersectional research, that can be a really good thing because it can help to reveal the unique experiences and challenges faced by Asian and AAPI individuals and beyond AAPI population. And it can provide insights for developing effective interventions and policies. And also disseminating research findings in accessible and culturally sensitive ways. It can include translating research into multiple languages and sharing findings at a community events. And changes that we can make as leaders in this institution include increasing the representation of Asian and AAPI individuals in leadership roles, faculty and staff population, creating spaces where these individuals can feel supported, validated, and understood, providing education and training on issues related to Asian and AAPI identity, culture, and experiences. And once again, addressing hate incidents when they do occur, and establishing clear reporting mechanisms, offering counseling services, and collaborating with law enforcement. And reviewing policies and practices to ensure they are inclusive and do not perpetuate bias or discrimination. And that's the end of it.
Thank you so much. I know that was a lot that Kahlen just gave you, but remember the point of building our community together is that this is not the end. Okay, this is the end in this semester's DEI Fridays. But these, all of our friendly and familiar faces are here. We're the people who show up. We are the choir who, everyone's like, we're preaching to the choir. That's okay. We like to sing. We like to practice, right? And the work that we're doing here together, learning from people like Kahlen and from Haley, I think this is really going to help us, and encourage us to get to keep working on ourselves. Yeah. To be able to do some of the things that Kahlen just described. So one of the last things I want to leave you in, because it just turned 1 p.m., is what used to be called Hollerback is now called Right to Be. And they are an organization that does bystander training. And I have found their trainings very useful. And they're very detailed. So when you're wondering, like, what do I say when I'm in this? It's very, very detailed, right? There's like kind of role-playing stuff. It's very important. And they do some in particular, or they used to, on Asian American, Asian AAPI kind of violence. And I shouldn't even say API, because to your point, Kahlen, they're taking 2 Pacific Islanders anyway, but all right. So let me close off now this session and just really thank you, our 2 guests today. Haley, Kim, we are so appreciative of you joining us. We are appreciative of you in so many ways. You are, part of us because you teach at Hunter sometimes, and we really appreciate all of our adjunct faculty. You do a huge amount of work for CUNY, and you are, I think I can say this on the recording, underpaid and overworked. And so we thank you for what you do for our students. We thank you for the organizing and the activism that you have done, and for your community and for other communities. And we wish you well in this first foray into politics. Kahlen, I want to thank you so much for everything you put into that presentation, and for sharing, and for coming up with this idea, and for putting yourself out there. You know, this is it's not easy on campus sometimes for people to be like, oh yes, I'd like to do this with the DEI, you know, and I welcome it, I really do. But to actually go do it, and then to come in space, we really appreciate your time and the thoughtfulness with which you came to the session. And for everyone else, what can I say? This has been so wonderful. Thank you so much for showing up. Many of you over and over. It's really appreciated. I want to thank since this is the last, I'll do like all the things really quickly. I want to thank Brezi for this year having these videos edited so that some of my comes out. Although you can't do that right there because I just keep talking, but that's okay. The beginnings and the ends are edited out, and I appreciate it, Brezi. There's also money for our speakers, which we think is wonderful because people should be paid for their time, especially a lot of people of color, a lot of women who we've had as speakers. I want to thank the Marxe DEI committee, some of whom are right here. Angie, thank you very much. And was Elaine here? Okay, people have gone right now, but bye Teresa. And I want to thank the Marxe School and everyone here at Baruch who's been so supportive and wonderful with elevating these issues. So with that, I'm going to say bye to those of you who are watching the video, and I'm going to stop the recording right now.